All right, boom. All right, fantastic. We're ready to go then. So, hey, welcome everybody to another episode of House and Home. We are so grateful you decided to spend some time with us tonight and hopefully next week and then a couple of weeks after that. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if this is your first time with us, welcome. If this is your second or 20th or 200th time with us, welcome back. We're really grateful you decided to spend some time with us tonight. So, for those of you I haven't had an opportunity to meet, my name is Scott Fusell, and I'm the Director of Education for CSL Management. I'm also the host of House and Home here. I'm a Beta Theta Pi, where I had a life-changing fraternity experience at Middle Tennessee State, which is the Harvard of the South, for those of you who have not heard of it before. But just really big time grateful that you guys all decided to spend some time with us tonight. There's a lot of places you could be on a Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern. And the fact that you decided to spend this time with us just reveals to us that you care deeply about the fraternity sorority experience, that you care deeply about your organization, and that you care deeply about the students who call our houses home. So for that, for the way you invest in these facilities and the way you invest in these students, we need you to know that we are extraordinarily grateful. When we do fraternity right, it can be a life-changing experience. And when we do it, but that doesn't happen without people like you stepping up to the plate and answering the call. So thank you for being here tonight and for all you do day in and day out. So with me tonight is, and the man doing the majority of the heavy lifting tonight is Woody Ratterman. He's our managing partner here at CSL Management. Also happens to be a chapter brother of mine where his life was changed at Middle Tennessee State as well. We were lucky enough to call 304 East Lytle our home for 2 or 3 years while we were in school. And the experience that we had there is why we continue to do what we do today. So Woody, thanks for being with us tonight. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us, and just really grateful for the expertise that you'll share with our crew tonight. So thanks.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. So tonight we're going to be diving into the first session of our House Corporation Pain Points series. Tonight we're going to be really focused on men and women and how we're mostly different, but we do have some similarities. And we're going to spend some time talking about what those similarities look like, what are some of our similar challenges, and what are some similar solutions that we can share to help advance the fraternity housing, the sorority housing experience, the residential experience. We're going to talk about all that tonight, and then we're going to set up next week and then the week after that as well, or 2 weeks after that as well. So we have a lot to cover during this series. What we really want you to leave here with is feeling that some of your frustration, some of those challenges that you think that some of those things that might be challenging you, that, yeah, you need those frustrations confirmed and you need them validated. And we're going to do that for you. So I think what you're going to find is that you're not alone is what we want you to leave here feeling from first and foremost is everybody's in this together and we're all facing similar challenges. And man, if we can put our brains together, there's a really powerful resource that we could create here with each other. So you'll hear us talk a lot here at CSL Management that none of us are as smart as all of us. So we appreciate what you're doing. And we hope, going to that third bullet, that there's some connection that comes out of this series. So we want to connect you to some new ideas. And we would also love to connect you with maybe a new person that you didn't know, maybe somebody that's also volunteering or working on your campus, or is a volunteer that's supporting a chapter near you. Again, everybody at Oklahoma State might be dealing with something a little bit similar. The people at Middle Tennessee State might be dealing with something a little bit similar. Folks at Purdue have some similar challenges. So we hope along the next 3 weeks or the 3 sessions we're together that you're able to connect with somebody that is in your neighborhood that you might be able to share some of the challenges that you're both facing and then come up with some similar solutions in the process. So that's what we're hoping to get out of these next 3 sessions. Here's where we're going. As I mentioned, tonight we're going to be focused on men and women and how we're mostly different, but also have some similarities. And then next week, we're going to be talking about prioritizing finances. And then the week after that, 2 weeks after that, we're going to have a panel town hall discussion with some experts in the industry, and you're not going to want to miss that. And you're going to want to come prepared with a truckload of questions because they're going to be teed up and ready to be peppered with your questions for 90 minutes that night. So we're looking forward to that town hall. Those are always really popular sessions and really informative. So that's what you have to look forward to. So let's talk about tonight. We're going to spend most of our time talking about some common struggles and some common solutions that we can put in place. So before we do that, though, we want to start with a question. Really curious to know from this group who does really extraordinary work, and many of you have been doing it for a lot of years. Really want to know what's keeping you up at night. Hop over into the chat and let us know. This is what's keeping me up at night. Man, when I'm thinking about the house, when I'm thinking about the members who call it home, this is what's keeping me up at night. When I'm thinking about the finances of this place, when I'm thinking about the physical structure, the health and wellness of the facility, this is what keeps me up at night. Let's hop over to the chat and see what we're seeing. Let me scroll down here. Let's see. The enrollment cliff coming in 3 to 5 years. That's a huge one. We've got to be prepared for that. Financial difficulties, HVAC, occupancy, financial. Yeah, that's super common. How we keep this generation willing to live in the house. Love that, Virginia. We're going to be talking quite a bit about and reflecting on, okay, are our facilities built to meet the needs of today's students? I will tell you that that's been a front burner issue for me, and a kind of a light bulb moment I've had the last couple of weeks. We've got a daughter who's going to be going up to Ball State next fall. And when you sit in on new student orientation type activities and you're seeing some of the amenities that are being available or are made available to our students in their residence halls, we've got some catching up to do. Love some of the other things I'm seeing here. Legal threats, competitive offerings. There we go. We just talked about that. Boilers. Some of those very fundamental pieces are things that keep us up at night. So, Mash, I love this. Bonnie mentioning regaining normal. What's normal going to look like? What's our new normal going to look like? Is there going to be a new normal? What's it going to take for us to get back to where we were, and how do we even build upon and make it better than what it was before? I think it's one of the things that's been really fun about the pandemic is a lot, and I'm not even joking. One of the best things about the pandemic is it forced all of us to think differently, to innovate, to create, to just completely look at things in a completely new way. And I think Bonnie brings up a great question here. How are we going to take advantage of that opportunity to create a new normal, one that's above and beyond what we had before? So yeah, you're seeing a lot of similarities there in terms of what everybody's kind of concerned about, what keeps them up at night. So what we'd like to do is just start right there and use similarities as our kind of our jumping off point. So one of the things, there's 3 or 4 of the things, and none of this is going to shock you, but some of the similarities that we often see is, okay, let's start with the obvious. When we're thinking about the similarities between men's and women's groups, we both have students who live in our houses. That's the obvious. Let's start there. But 3 of the more common, or the maybe lesser known pieces that you may not be aware of are, it's not uncommon for us, whether we're working with a men's group or a women's group, there's not a whole lot of succession planning going on. There's major opportunities for us to make some advancements there. We're also seeing a massive increase in the needs of these facilities. What you may not know is 70% of the fraternity and sorority houses across the United States were built before 1980. 70%. So we've got a really rapidly aging infrastructure here that is growing in terms of the care that it needs. The challenge with that is, are we set up financially to support that? And are we set up from a human resources perspective to support those growing needs? That brings us to that last bullet. Our volunteer pool is shrinking. It's tough. I'm not telling anybody on this call anything you don't know. It's tough to get people to volunteer to be on the housing corporation. It's a tough job. Oftentimes it's a thankless job. I would tell our house directors that are on the call probably can feel that too. So we've got some pretty significant challenges that we're both faced with, whether you're a men's group or a women's group. but we have some very fundamental ways that we can tackle all of the above as well. So while we got some challenges, we have a lot of opportunities. So we're going to dive into that tonight. So here's where I'm going to kind of lean into Woody here. And Woody, would you take a few minutes and talk about what the common challenges you are seeing from on the men's side, what some of the common challenges you're seeing on the women's side, and let's talk about some of those operational efficiencies, operational fundamentals that we need to have in place to overcome some of those challenges that we're seeing on both the men's and women's side of the equation.
Sure. And it's good to be with everyone tonight. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm actually, if you've seen Steve present at any of these, you're probably saying, where is Woody? Because this doesn't look like my office. I'm actually in Steve's office. So you're not seeing double, I can assure you, but it's good to be with you. I'm down here visiting our central office in Cleveland, Tennessee. So, and when Scott and I were talking and preparing for this next series, and we were thinking through our goals and what we want to communicate and actually just get on with you guys and talk about, it's really, Bonnie, to your point, start working toward that new normal and getting back to a position of playing offense versus defense. We have been playing defense for way too long at this point. And, listening to what's keeping you guys up at night is certainly all valid points and things that we think about continuously. But I certainly want to open up with the idea or the thought that, still to this point, our industry has always been resilient. Our organizations have always been resilient. Our leadership, our volunteers, our house directors, the people that work in this industry are passionate about it and very talented. And I, for one, are very excited about what the future holds. We have seen drops in enrollment before. We have seen challenges both socially and politically. We have seen a lot of this stuff in various forms before now, and some in even worse forms of what we've been through, and we're still here today. So that always excites me. That's why we do what we do and what we're passionate about it. And tonight is really trying to start shifting back to what we have always seen, or what we've kind of the challenges, and some of the reasons why Steve and I started CSL is to start working through some of these commonalities that have been a part of student housing, or I should say fraternity and sorority housing, for many, many decades. And how can we figure out a way to get beyond them and create opportunities that will make sure that we're using our facilities in the most effective way to support the mission of our organization, right? So but we were thinking through, many of you on this phone or on this call are from men's groups versus women's groups. And there is so much opportunity in that and to learn from each other. So hopefully, through tonight and through this series and through questions, we can do that. And we think there's tremendous value in that process. But let's talk about the men for a second and what we commonly talk through and what we're working through, and some of the goals in our work with our clients on the men's side of the equation, and what are the things that we're visiting about and trying to tackle day in and day out. First and foremost is the accountability piece, right? We're always trying to work with our men and our members of making sure that we have people that are in our facilities, people that are part of our organizations that care about the facility, try to take care of the facility. But we also have the challenge as alums and volunteers who may not be close to their facilities. I was on a call this afternoon with a group that we're talking to that, their closest volunteers an hour and a half away. So our eyes and ears, and how do we create an effective environment where we've got accountability taking place for our men, accountability to how we take care of our facilities, because it's becoming more and more of an expectation versus what we've seen 10, 15, 20 years ago. Then you take what the pandemic has really exposed, and I would say has really accelerated as a positive coming out of this, is on the men's equation. We've been talking ad nauseum, if you will, from an operational and a financial standpoint of how we start adopting more of a professional management stance to our facilities. Doesn't mean you have to go out and hire CSL. We'd love you to, but that's not our point here. The point is that we need to start putting in those processes, those best practices as a professionally managed real estate facility, if you will, on top of knowing at the same time this is a facility to live out the mission of our organization. But when you put in these operational procedures and we start doing some of these things that we know we should have been doing for years and years, it costs money. And certainly the pandemic has forced that hand in terms of cleaning, lawn care, repair and maintenance, sanitation, all the different things that we've just had to stay on top of because parents want to see it, students want to see it. The pandemic has required us to do some of this stuff. It's putting us in a better posture, but we still have more work to do. But at the same time, it costs money. And what we find on our financial front in the Common Challenge, we just haven't planned. We haven't operated from a budget. We've been very fortunate. Our house has been paid off, so we haven't had a mortgage, and we haven't been charging market rent to get sufficient cash flow or whatever it may be. And that's coming to light. And so we really need to be focusing on our finances. And then as Scott said, it's just a perpetuation planning, succession planning, and that is a commonality on both sides of the equation. So we're going to talk more. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, Scott, and switch to the women's side, but we'll talk more about opportunities and ways that we can provide some solutions to overcome these challenges. On the women's side of the equation, you start to look at, and one of the biggest things that we're always having a fun conversation about is booze and boys, right? And well, nobody wants to live, and I know that was something that's keeping someone up at night in our chat session is, what are we doing with this generation and encouraging them to live in these facilities? And I think for us, it's always about, well, what's your story? And what are you talking to these members about? And what are you training in terms of recruitment and giving them a story to tell of what the experience is like living in a fraternity or a sorority house? We need to make sure that we're providing them a conversational piece of why it matters and how the camaraderie, we have talked about it many times. You can go and have an apartment and a rooftop pool and all these different things that we think gives these other facilities a competitive edge. But at the end of the day, they can't recreate the camaraderie and the experience that unfolds in the houses. It just doesn't happen. And we all know that. And so we need to be developing those stories, and we need to be looking at giving them talking points, and for us also sharing those stories and telling them why the experience matters and why living in the house is so great. But also to the other point, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but we also need to make sure our facilities are adapted to the needs of our students today. It's not just necessarily coming in for meetings, food, and sleeping, right? On the women's side of the equation, we typically are doing those three things. There's not so much a lot of opportunity, or we're not doing enough, I should say, from the camaraderie and creating the connections and providing opportunities within that facility that we're going beyond those three normal functions of the chapter house. We'd also say on the women's side, goes without question, 15, 20, 30 years advance of where the men are in terms of managing their real estate portfolios and their chapter houses. But in some regards, I feel like we're stuck when we're working with our women's organizations because we've done things so much the same way. And we have our contract administration game strong, and we know when our women are getting their leases and they're signing, and our accounts receivables are always low, and we're staying on top of our payables, and we have all of our preventive maintenance in place. And man, we're just a well-oiled machine. And we get into this rut. And so are we taking advantage of the resources that are out there to maybe help us to innovate? Something we'll talk about here in a second as well. We need to be doing more in innovation and how we are setting our facilities up to meet the needs of our students and to look forward to the future. And again, creating an opportunity where they want to live in. Keeping up with the Joneses, that is certainly something over the last 10 years, you've seen an unprecedented amount of investment in facilities, especially on the women's side, tremendous amount of expansion. We're certainly seeing that pause, and have certainly for the last 12 months, but thinking through, going through the rat race of always keeping up with our neighbors and what they're doing is a challenge, and it takes a lot of capital. And therefore we go back to this idea of a new phenomenon that we're seeing more and more as a challenge on the women's side is we're over leveraged, meaning we weren't used to having mortgages, and now we have these big mortgage payments every month, and that adds pressure to making sure women live in the house. That adds pressure that we're recruiting members, and is creating a new dynamic that maybe wasn't there 15 or 20 years as substantial as it is today. And again, as we've talked about with the men, is our perpetuation, and who's coming up to volunteer next. And what we're going to talk about some of these fundamentals, if we want to go to that slide, Scott, here in a second, all of this stuff is not rocket science, right? We're not sitting here talking about things that are new to us or we haven't heard about, or challenges that we haven't worked through in the past. But what we are saying is that, as we look at these fundamentals that we're going to go over here in a second, and Scott's going to provide this to the group after the call tomorrow, we'll get it out to everyone. But when we look at these fundamentals, these are the items that if we're hitting on day in and day out and we're staying consistent with, we're going to create a scenario where our members are going to, hopefully, and our alums will be more apt to volunteer, because they're going to walk into a situation where they know that they're not going to have to deal with a lot of problems. They know they're not going to have to deal with a lot of situations that are beyond their comfort level or their expertise, right? So what we want to talk about a little bit, I'm not going to run down this list collectively. Before the call, I kind of reviewed it. I said, all right, I'm going to group these for you guys to talk about some very high level aspects of what these fundamentals are and that we need to be doing. So one thing we always talk about is revenue, right? Revenue is important to any business, any operation. And as we look through this, and we need to make sure that we are charging the market rent, we need to make sure we have an appropriate level. A lot of times we see our out-of-house member fees are not commensurate to the service that we're providing, and we're scared to talk about that in some regards because of what the competition is doing, or people aren't charging enough on their end, so we have to stay with them to be competitive. And we're always sensitive to the fact that this needs to be an affordable experience, and certainly the cost of being in the fraternity sorority is something that comes up when we're out recruiting new members. But at the same time, as a house corporation and as having an asset like we do, we have to be responsible and make sure our revenue game is where it needs to be. A phenomenon that we see probably more often on the men's side, but it's certainly on the women's side as well, is that we just allow late payments, accounts receivables coming from our members. We just allow them to keep going and go beyond 30 days without any really aggressive efforts on our end to collect that money. Well, they're a member, they have hardship, whatever it may be. Totally understand it. And there are some real hardships in that scenario, but at the same time, we have to stay on it, because more often than not, when our accounting and bookkeeping team is getting into the trenches with our clients and we're looking at all these past due fees and what people have not paid, and some of them go years and years and years, we reach out to them. It's been 4 or 5 years since they've heard from anybody, and you know what? They start making payments. So we really need to be making sure that on the revenue side of the equation, we're taking care of those key components and not letting some of that discipline, if you will, slack. And then I look at some of the practices of revenue, but then that financial discipline piece, right? We've all in the last 12 months have had to be very vigilant about our expenses. Well, let's not lose that moving forward. Let's not just wait for a pandemic to require us to really make sure we're tightening the belt where we're needing to tighten, and also focus where we need to be investing too, right? So take that, what we have learned, and the discipline and some of the things that we've had to do in the last 12 months, those good aspects of it, let's carry that forward and make sure that we do have a budget. We're not just creating a budget, we're actually working the budget. We're looking at it. We're looking at it every month. We're looking at what this month's trend is versus last month. We have the discipline to do that. Sounds very elementary, but the more and more that we work with clients and the more that we work in the industry, we see we're not doing the financial discipline things on a consistent basis. So the more that we can do that, the better. I'd also say to many people, this seems very trivial. To us, we think it is very, very important. But documentation and record keeping, and there's really no excuse in this day and age. Everybody can get a Google account. There's all kinds of different ways to do shared accounts out there and saving documents. But when you think about documentation and record keeping, again, going back to the fact that we're wanting to get volunteers, we're wanting to be able to perpetuate. We'd like to bring more people in to share their experience and be part of the process of developing these men and women through the role of a house corporation volunteer, right? And in that, well, again, if I'm out talking to someone and I can share with them, hey, here's, man, we've got our 990s done, our state registrations are in place, here's all our agreements and where we save them for our preventative maintenance. We know who our vendor partners are. We have all this well-oiled machine. So operationally, it should work like clockwork. And that allows us more time to focus on the members and the fun stuff. Okay, I might be able to be in for that versus coming into a situation where we're really just hoping to find another warm body that will help us figure out this mess. And that's unfortunately what we see time and again when we're talking about transitioning. So the documentation and record keeping is critical. I'd also say it's critical from the standpoint for those of us who are looking to fund and finance some of the work that we need to have done at the house. As Scott said, over 70% of these facilities were built before the 80s. There's a lot of deferred maintenance. There's a lot of improvements that we're going to have to be forced to be made. So in that, if we're going to a bank and when again, we can show good documentation, good record keeping, they're going to be a lot more apt to work with us. So that's really a key fundamental. And then the last piece I'd say is just really, and we've talked about, this was our favorite word going out last year was the communication piece, right? Communicating, but I would drive that from the communicating and connecting and planning aspect of all of this. Again, one of the disciplines that we have seen, one of the opportunities that we have seen from this pandemic is that it's given a reason for these calls more frequently. It's given a reason for our boards to talk, House Corporation boards, our volunteers to talk more frequently. It has created opportunities where we have had to collaborate more with our national organizations than we may have had to in the past. It's given us a reason to collaborate and talk with our university officials. All those things are good things. Unfortunately, we've had to be doing it within a pandemic and a challenge. But how do we carry some of those disciplines moving forward where we're creating the connections, we're communicating, and we're planning, we're putting some intentionality into what we're doing. We have a mission, we have a vision, we know why we're doing this. We know why we want our members to live in the house. We know why we want this facility to be a part of that process. We know what our vision is for the facility overall and how we're going to hopefully try to go about executing it. So really taking that positive aspect of all this that you see tonight, all the different calls you've been on in the last 12 months. Granted, I realize there is a real thing is fatigue on that front, but taking and trying to continue what is a reasonable amount of communication and connection and things of that nature, and really use that time to plan for the future, talk through some of these fundamentals that we have here. Are we checking these boxes? Do we have just the minimum expectations almost, if you will, for entry into running an effective chapter house? Do we have that done? And then if we have, then let's talk about how we innovate and how we move forward and try to take the house to the next level. Scott, let's go to the next slide. So in looking at this, again, a lot of these things and what we always want to try to do, and sometimes to us, it seems very elementary. Some to you that are on this call have been around for many, many years, many, many decades. You look at this information, you're like, man, this is the same thing I've heard 15, 20 years ago. Okay. How much of this that we're talking about today, though, are you actually implementing, that we're actually doing, and that we're doing it consistently? Can we actually say time in and time out that we're hitting all of these marks? We will tell you in all of the opportunities that we've had to work with House corporations, national organizations, and the privilege that it is to do it, we see that there's always some place in those fundamentals that I went through that we're just not doing it. We slipped in that discipline. And when we have, that's when we start seeing things go in the wrong direction. So what's the grassroots of how we start this process and how we make sure that we're doing the things that we need to get back on offense? First of all, do your research. There's no excuses today. Everything is at our fingertips if you think about it. And just about anything that you need as a resource or a tool or an idea or anything operationally that you may be looking for, it's out there. It's available, whether it's the organizations, universities, companies like us, whatever it may be. There's not any really reason to guess. So do your research, dig in a little bit, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised in how much information and resources you have. We got to run our houses like a business. We talk about, we've got to think like a business owner. That is tough. That's where we get uncomfortable because we are a fraternal organization. These are our brothers and our sisters, and we want to take care of them. We got to prop each other up. But at the same time, we need to run like a business, and we have to be effective in doing that. Go back to the previous slides if you want to know what that means. But we also need to be making sure we're giving ourselves enough time. And we'll talk more about this in session 2. But right now, just for those of you, we know we're going into CapEx season, right? We're going into summer projects. And lo and behold, if you are now going out and getting pricing for work or whatever that may have been out there, and if you haven't signed agreements for it, you're going to see probably 30, 40, 50% increases in all pricing that we're seeing across the board, whether it's furniture, flooring, wallboard, painting, whatever it may be. The last 30 to 45 days has been really nutty in terms of what we're seeing in pricing and how long things are taking. For those of you who did start early, already have those signed agreements and that pricing commitment and have people lined up, good for you, because right now it is certainly a very challenging environment that's out there. But we'll talk more about that next week. But also think like a parent and a student. If we're thinking and we're running like a business, it's not just necessarily doing the best practices and checking a box and making sure that we've hit all of these points that we just talked about. We also need to realize we have a product here to sell, and we need to make sure that these are our parents and our students are our customers. They are our members, and we love them dearly, but they're also clients, they're customers. So are we thinking about them? Even though sometimes they drive us crazy and sometimes we don't really want to think of them as a customer or client, they are, and we need to make sure we're taking care of. Finally, think about your common bond, right? We do this, a lot of this stuff can get heavy, a lot of this can get challenging. It's a lot of work in some regards, and as Scott has said earlier, sometimes a thankless job, but we do this for the love of our organization. We do this certainly from our standpoint. We think about every generation coming out of college as our next generation of leadership. They are well worth the investment, and they need our time, and we need them to certainly have a fantastic experience and take the skills that we all got and the memories as well and take those into society and hopefully be great citizens and take our country to the next level, right? That's what we're doing this for, and in the mission of our organization. And ask for help. Again, and Scott, we can go to the next slide. There's plenty of help out there. There are plenty of resources. There are a lot of opportunities, if you will, for us to pick from and to help us in whatever challenge and whatever unique experience that we're dealing with at this moment that we're needing help or a resource with. Whether that's in terms of our national organization has resources, there's industry partners that are out there that can help us. We have each other for sure that we can collaborate and learn from. So just ask for help. There's great communities. We were talking with Ivel before everybody was on. I mean, the infrastructure in the community at Oklahoma State University, the house corporations, is fantastic, and they can share and they can learn and they can grow from each other. So ask for that help. Take advantage of the resources that you have. Remember that we need to have a vision of why this is rewarding to us. Again, as you list through the challenges and the competition, and we may be over leveraged or whatever it may be, all those things can be solved. All those things are easily workable in due time when you lean on the resources and ask for help. But it certainly becomes more difficult if we don't have a vision, if we don't have a reason why we're doing this, or we don't have a path to where we want to go. That's when we can really be in danger of getting where we want the house to go ultimately. Have discipline in all areas. Again, we see one of the things coming out of this pandemic is it's required us to have discipline, whether we wanted to or not in many areas. And so don't lose sight of that. I remember when I graduated from grad school, I went late in life, had 2 kids, full-time job, 2 young kids. And I'm graduating, I'm meeting with one of my mentors, and I'm like, the last 2 years I've been going to school Monday through Thursday from 6 o'clock at night till 9 o'clock at night, nonstop. January through December for 2 years. I said, I don't know what I'm gonna do with all my time. And he said, don't lose the discipline, right? Don't take everything that you put into this and then just go back to watching TV all the time or doing whatever. Take what you've gone and what you've done with that and carry it forward. And I think we can use that same mentality, that same insight as we're coming out of this pandemic and start getting back on an offensive mode. be consistent. That's a big thing. Scenario and emotional responses, right? This is an emotional group, an emotional industry. We're very passionate about it. And a lot of times that can help us, but sometimes it can hurt us. So we want to make sure that we're staying consistent both in our emotions and we're being consistent in our operations and doing everything that we know we're supposed to be doing on a regular basis. And lastly, let's sell the experience. There's a lot of positive opportunities here. I know our friends at Pennington did a webinar recently. I wasn't able to listen into it, but Patrick and one other individual doing a session about why this why this experience matters, right? Don't need to tell you guys, you know why it matters. So go tell it to your members, make sure they know how to tell it to prospective members, and make sure you're giving them a great story to tell as it relates to the facility and why living in it can be life-changing. So Scott, with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Woody. We want to take a few minutes and field a few questions. If you have a question, you can either pop it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and jump in. But we didn't want to wrap up the session without giving you guys an opportunity to ask a question or two over the content we've covered tonight, or maybe what's ahead. So if you have a question, fire away or jump in the chat. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to unmute if they want. While that's happening, Woody, a couple of things that you said that I really loved was how the pandemic forced us to put some certain fundamentals in place, and let's not lose that. Frankly, I loved the chaos many times that was created because of the last 12 months we've gone through, and I'm not saying that it's over, because we're certainly a long way from being out of this thing, but just the fact that it made you get creative and it made you get innovative and do things completely different. I think there is some really wonderful lessons learned out of this experience, and I'm hoping we can continue to live those out. So and to lean into them. I've got a question here in the chat here. I want to take on. Heather wants to know, why is the volunteer pool shrinking? What do you have a thought on that?
Well, I think we're not, I guess, and if you look at when members are coming out of their undergraduate experience, we were, this was part, Scott, if you go back to our consulting work at the university in the Midwest, we were working with, the one time we had the one psychologist there, and what she was talking about is that, what they're seeing, and it was fascinating, and I have to somewhat agree with her analysis, is that students coming out of universities today do not have necessarily the affinity or the connectivity that previous students did. So the thought process was, it was more about them as an individual versus the experience of going to a game and rooting for their school and being a part of that tribe, if you will, or what the fraternities and sororities are. It was really more individual type of valued experience. And so what that translates is, when they leave, they just go and they look elsewhere for those types of connections and don't necessarily have a permanent thought or psychological connection back to the experience they had. It was pretty, I'm sure I butchered her analysis there, but it was very eye-opening to us, is that, what are we doing as organizations to ensure that we're creating a lifelong connection, and not necessarily, as you look at, take housing into perspective. I mean, I lived 3.5 years in my fraternity house. My brother lived in his for 4. If you look at it today, especially on the women's side of the equation, given the chapter size and everything else, they may be lucky if they get to live in their house 1 year, because of the size of the pledge classes and everything else. So that really gives us their freshman year, they're excited, they're in the organization, man, they get to carry it in their sophomore year to live in the house. Then they get out, and now I have my travel abroad, and I have all this pressure to think in my junior year what my career is, and then my senior year, I've got 1 foot out the door. So in that 4-year experience, we really have about 2, and if we're lucky, 2.5 years to build a bond that will carry them well beyond this. Where in the past, where it wasn't as fast paced, there wasn't all the craziness that you can see in this day and age, and how we communicate, technology and everything else is a little bit slower. We were making those connections more intentionally in our facilities or within our organizations. We don't have that. So that's where we have to be a little bit more innovative and think through opportunities of how, when they're graduating, what are the things that we can do to make sure that they're connected back to this organization. And when we do come and when we do ask them to hopefully give back, they're going to be more willing to do it. I also think we need to, go ahead, Scott, you have a point?
No, I was just going to say, the one thing I'd add to that is we're also, you got to think about everything that we're competing against. So, most of our alums are, they're being asked to coach youth sports or volunteer at church, or they're volunteering for a local nonprofit, or they're active in our communities and many other opportunities. So, we've got a lot of things, a lot of opportunities we're competing against. So you take that lack of emotional connection that Woody just hinted at, and then you compare that, or you add that to all the other things we're competing against. It makes it difficult to recruit additional volunteers into our volunteer ranks. So all of those things have made for a really complex volunteer recruitment environment. So I think we spent enough time on that question, Woody. I don't want to. We've got a few more here that popped up, so I want to make sure at least get to touch on all of them. So Steve is asking, where do I go for my replacement? Is there a pool of experienced, capable house directors that we can tap into? So you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So there's, I would say the house director pool or community is certainly more connected than ever in the past, whether it's through social media and different Facebook groups and things of that nature. We are certainly, as CSL, so if you're looking from us, we have the opportunity and the privilege, just the fact that we work across the country with so many different chapters at so many different campuses. We typically have a pretty good pool of folks that are staying in touch with us, even, and communicating where they are wanting to go, or if they are looking to make a change, or whatever it may be. We also know that university offices, the fraternity, sorority, and Greek life office, are becoming a better and more knowledgeable of where house directors and where they may be some opportunities on that front. We actually are working on a lot of different avenues on that front to make sure that there's opportunities to be more visible, if you will, in the industry as a house director. So I think, look at the social media circles, look at your campus, look at groups like us that work with house directors day in and day out. I think you will find that there are it's becoming more and more easier to find our replacement on the house director front.
Yeah. Steve, the other thing I'd add to that is we support a house director Facebook group. It's called the Fraternal House Directors Online Community. If you search that group on Facebook, send me an invite or a connection request, and I can get you in there, and you can start to maybe generate a conversation there, because there's a ton of house directors that are connected there that might be able to give you some insight into some additional insights to what your questions are there. So great question. Virginia's asking, okay, when we talk about facilities and the need to continue to innovate, we're going to need to look at major changes in how we do things. She's asking about sleeping porches, shared rooms are obsolete, or are shared rooms obsolete? Those are some of the things that have really helped build family and community and connectivity in the past. But with this generation, there's some reluctance there. So I want you to talk about that, but I want to hit on two things really quickly. Virginia, it's not just the sleeping porches and the shared rooms that you need to consider. And I'm trying to find who I need to mute here, and I apologize for the little background noise there. But hang on one second, gang. And I can't find it. But anyway, hopefully you guys can hear me okay. But we've got some of our organizations are just reimagining spaces. I'll use Sigma Kappa, for instance. They're, some of their rooms that were not used quite as as much as they used to be, or once were. They're reimagining those spaces, and they're creating spaces that are intended to support the mental health and wellness of their members. So they may have specific colors, specific lighting, specific sound. Those are fidgets on that are available. They may be streaming the Calm app in there. So just a specific space that is designed to support the mental health and wellness of their members. So those are some of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about innovating. I would encourage you to reach out, and I know there are other organizations that are doing it as well, but I'm just more familiar with Sigma Kappa in terms of what they're doing as far as their reimagining spaces concepts go. But that would be a great resource to reach out to if you want some innovative ideas on how you can some of the innovative things that we're doing in our facilities. But I'd start there. And then Woody, when we're thinking about sleeping porches and shared rooms, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, so first, Scott, it's whoever has the UCAM 3 picture. I can't get it to pop up on my computer to mute, but it's the individual that their image is a camera. But yeah, I would tell you, look, we're going into the fall right now, and we have really decommissioned lots of our sleeping porches and cold dorm, warm dorm. There's a little different, people call it different vernacular that's there. But what's fascinating is when the house corporations are going back to the chapter and saying, what do we want to do? What do we think about this? It is still very much a valued asset to those houses that have had it. So I think a lot of it, and look, I get it. I have two kids, one's a boy and a girl, so they didn't share a room, but they've never shared or had a roommate before or anything. But my son's going to college next year, and we're talking through that and what that opportunities are, and he's getting excited about it. And I think that's where we have to talk about our storytelling and what the benefits are and thinking about it versus just saying, well, it's a sleeping porch, take it or leave it. Well, what's the advantage of sleeping porch? Think about it. If you have someone getting up late or early in the morning for class, they're getting ready, they quietly leave. Or if it's late at night and we're having a social event or whatever, and you're up there, you're not going to hear anything. The storytelling, the community time in the rooms and different. I mean, there's a litany. I mean, when I talk to folks that have actually alums that lived in them and they tell the stories, all right, that sounds pretty cool. Because I didn't get it. Scott and I, our house was not a sleeping porch. We shared. So I think it's more, to me, it goes more to the booze and boys. It's an excuse. And if you don't have a compelling story to tell that gets beyond that excuse, then yeah, they're going to be able to talk their way out of it. But you cannot convince me that the experience and the opportunities and all that go through with living in the house is less appealing than what other campus or student housing opportunities are. It is more compelling. It is a better story and it's a better experience. And I think that's where it starts. But to the business aspect of it, yeah, I mean, I think you got to be innovative, and maybe you do have some single rooms for your upperclassmen if you want them to live in, and we need to think through that. Maybe our sleeping dorms are smaller; they're not as dense as they were in the past, and we get creative on some of the other rooms. But I will tell you, in the last 7 years, we've done over 150 million in construction projects, a lot of it new construction. And I will tell you, when we were looking at the rooms filling up, the ones that get picked time and time again first are the 4-person, 6-person, 3-person rooms. It's not the singles. So to me, when I hear that, I'm not deaf to the fact that we have students coming from houses where they didn't have to share a room and different expectations. Please hear me when I say I understand that, but I also think it's more of an excuse versus a problem. We need to recognize it. We need to innovate to where we can on it. But more importantly, we need to continue to refine and develop that story and that message that resonates with the students today about why being not only in a fraternity and sorority is great, but if you have the opportunity to live in a house, it's phenomenal.
So I want to field one more question and we're going to wrap up here. We generally go about 75 minutes on these, but I want to start putting a bow on this thing. So Eugene asked a great question. He's asking about, many of his chapter officers are now sophomores and juniors instead of juniors and seniors, and what training tools are available to provide leadership experiences for these young men. So, Eugene, I would encourage you. I don't know what organization you're with, but I would encourage you to reach out to your organization's headquarters, administrative office, executive office, however you phrase it. There's a high degree of likelihood that they have multiple leadership development opportunities available. There's also a great chance that there are multiple opportunities available on campus. So there should be no shortage of leadership development experiences available to the young men who call your house home or they call your chapter home. So that's one of the things I think that our organizations have done a great job of over the last 10 or 20 years is we've really leaned into leadership and developing young leaders in a pretty significant way. And so I would encourage you again to look to your organization or to look to the university and or a combination of the two, because there should not be a shortage of resources there for you to lean into in terms of leadership development. But that's a great question. So
Scott, can I add just real quick?
100%.
All right. So real quick, and I know we're getting long into the hour. That is a great example, though, too, of where we have a lot of opportunities to hit the easy button, and sometimes we're not thinking about that. We're talking about leadership opportunities. We're talking about getting our undergraduates involved in the housing and things of that nature. And I know sometimes, quote unquote, yes, I want to learn and I see this as a business. They get all excited and then you don't see them for a while. And so you do have to work and force the issue a little bit. But we're missing opportunities like when we talk about right now. In the fall, we start talking about contracts and getting people to sign up and sign the contracts. How often at the time when you're talking with the facility manager, undergrad leadership position, or the chapter and the treasurer saying, hey, let's look at this contract and talk about why these clauses are there. These are important stuff for you to learn as you go out into the real world and the business world and you start having to recontract yourself. You need to understand what these sections are. How many of us are actually doing that? When we're creating the budget and what appropriate levels of the budget are there, are we inviting them into that process so they see what things cost and say, hey, guys, you're wondering why we couldn't do this renovation or whatever. It's because we had $38,000 in repair and maintenance needs due to wall damage, social events, whatever on the men's side of the equation, or on the women to maybe, hey, we have a very disciplined strategy here to how much we reserve, and we're trying to tackle this project in a different manner, and here's why. There are so many opportunities just in the day-to-day interaction and the day-to-day work that we're doing within these facilities to invite the undergraduate members to participate and sometimes maybe pull them into that conversation. And there are a ton of resources, whether you go to our hub on our website or whatever, just pick a topic, pick something. And, the biggest news of the last 12 months is force majeure clauses in all of our leases because of a pandemic. Well, what the hell does that mean? That's a learning opportunity. That's a leadership development opportunity. So look for those easy buttons as well.
Oh, that's a good points, Woody. Great points. So, well, hey, we'll start wrapping up there. And here's a look at what's coming up next week. We're going to do a deep dive into prioritizing finances next week. We'll be talking a lot about processes, talking about budgeting. And for those of you who are really interested, we want to talk about, what's it take for us to make a house director financially accessible? That you won't hear anybody bang the drum for the value that a house director brings to the experience more than our team. So would love to have a deeper conversation about how we make that process financially accessible, especially given some financially difficult times that we're in right now. So, and if you've got a success story that we can include in next week's conversation specifically to that topic, well, we would love to have that, and we would love to have you share with our group next week, because it's been especially the last 2 years, we've seen universities and organizations start to put a greater emphasis on house directors, and it stretched us, many of our organizations, in ways we weren't fully prepared to deal with, and so a lot of us have had to get creative. So if you've got a success story and you think there's value in sharing it, well, we would love to hear that from you before next week. So. With that being said, I will. Here's a shameless plug. Absolutely shameless plug. If you've got a house director and you want to build into them in an impactful way, we are hosting the 2021 Fraternal House Directors Conference in Denver in June. So if you'd like to learn more about it, you can go to the website to learn more there. But that is until next week. We just want to encourage you guys to stay in touch. Here's the sessions. You can register for next week and the following at csladvance.com. And until then, please stay in touch. Here's our social channels, our website, and if you have a question that you want to reach out to us on, their phone number there to the central office is available as well. And all, by the way, here's our personal emails as well. So if there's anything we can do between now and next week, please don't hesitate to reach out. But with that being said, I'll just say thank you again for spending some time with us tonight. Thanks again for spending some time with the students at Call Your Houses Home. And so grateful for all you guys do week in, week out, day in, day out. So thanks again for showing up tonight. We'll see you next time on House and Home. Take care, everybody.